He started with basically chapter was on communicating to attract and influence investors, which is kind of play off the, how to attract and influence people, I felt like. And the acronym he used was ABD, which is always be disclosing, which, instead of closing, disclosing, which I think is super important, because the last thing you want is somebody who's getting into the deal without knowing all the ins and outs, without knowing all the facts, and making a decision that they're ultimately won't be happy with, because if that's going to be the situation, you're not going to have a good business model if you have clients or investors that are unhappy with the investment, which kind of leads into the reputation, which, that's like, the basic tenet. Reputation is everything. Once a reputation is tarnished, it can take years to rebuild, if ever. And everything in our today's economy is built on trust, and if your investors cannot trust what you're trying to provide, or based on your reputation, that's going to prevent you from building anything that you want. So that he went into then vetting potential investors, and in vetting he talks about number one was by educating. So he goes into educating investors, providing all the details of the investment, all the risk, because if you're going into an investment, that's going to be a long-term relationship. So you want to make sure that the people that are involved are in the know, so to speak, of what you're trying to accomplish. Then he went into the next point of being authentic. So, and I like that he gave the example of how he was trying to be like everyone else. So this is what everyone else is doing, and that's what's working for them. So that's what I'm going to try. And how it just totally failed, because he wasn't really being authentic about what this was about for him in terms of real estate. And he found this niche that he was truly passionate about. Once he got into talking about things that are, like a passion project for him, then authenticity was just part of it. You didn't have to work on it. It was just there. So I liked the fact that he was looking at, okay, well, what's your passion, kind of like finding your bigger why, and going from there. And then he talked about creating systems. So that's where he got into like really all specific things you can do, including email examples, which I thought was awesome, because it's a lot easier to edit something than create something from scratch. So he was talking about creating a sales funnel, and he said he likes to avoid actually in-person meetings when he first meets investors, because he feels it's inefficient, because it's before you really know the person, what they're about, and if it's going to be a fit for the investor and for the sponsor. So he said he always insists on making a call first. And as far as scheduling calls, that's when he gave example of the email and the scheduling tools he used. He said he uses Schedule Once, which is basically he sends out a link with his calendar and availability. So then you avoid all the back and forth in terms of trying to schedule time. And it may look like, well, it's just a few minutes there and there, but over a long period of time, it adds up to hours that you're saving and trying to schedule something as simple as a phone call. And I think he said he used Mixmax for email templates. So emails that he sends out to a lot of repetitive emails, the same type of email to different potential investors. He used a template through Mixmax. I've never tried it, so I'm not sure how it works, but I will. And then he goes into the whys of scheduling the call, and the two things are the introduction, and then step two is sort of the due diligence. And he really talked about how those two things should be two separate calls. It shouldn't be combined into one, because you want to make sure you first really establish a genuine connection, get to know the potential investor. And then if there's a fit and if there's interest, then you get into the due diligence, which is the ins and out of the deal. So for the intro calls, he recommended to, kind of first establish the rapport, create this, find out what's motivating the investor. He talked about the sort of, this is when the investor is evaluating you as well. So it would be important in the course of the phone call to kind of try to bring out what motivates you as the investor, your moral compass, what kind of challenges you overcame, sort of like the personal context in the story. And he talks about how it's important to have several stories to tell the investor to kind of relate to what you're doing. And then the call, he basically said it's important to set up an agenda. So, and to establish a time frame. So you want to make sure that you say, okay, this phone call is going to be 30 minutes at such and such time. I have another call set up, so I want to, make sure that everybody gets my attention, kind of thing. So by doing that, he says that you create this not just sense of urgency, but also that time is valuable and there's other people interested. So, so he talked about basically the book that he talked about that he suggested to read, which I also have not yet read, but I will. It's called Pitch Anything. And he said that book talked about time framing and pricing. And time framing is setting up that 30-minute time frame that's blocked for the phone call and sticking to it. And, basically outlining what the call is going to be about. And he suggested what to talk about on the call in there. And then pricing portion is that to make sure you phrase everything in the call to say that the prize is you, that it's not the investor that's the prize. It's not the investor's money. The prize is the sponsor who's offering this opportunity to the investor. Oh, and then the tips that he talks about for the intro call is to, first of all, make sure you establish the status of the investor as an accredited investor. Obviously, it would have to be papered down the road, but to kind of have that in the beginning of the conversation as well. Learn about their background, investing experience, what their motivations are to invest. And all of those things you learn about is to be able to phrase your pitch, so to speak, in the way that addresses the problem that the investor faces. I think motivations he talked about was fear of missing out, benefits of investing, do they have an immediate cash flow need, or would they be using it more for retirement? So once those motivations are established, then you can use them later in the conversation in addressing like their key motivating factors. Let's see. Oh, and then he talked about his motivating factor, which basically, he said he was morally obligated to help to get people out of the stock market due to their unpredictability of the stock market. That basically he felt like stock market is not necessarily the best investment strategy, and what he offered can really help people build wealth. And that was his moral compass and passion, and kind of all tied into what he talked about in the beginning. And then he talked about addressing their motivations. Yeah, pretty much that was it. And then I thought it was pretty cool that he talked about setting up the investment thesis. So basically, what is your high level overview of your niche? Like, what is it that you are trying to do with your investments? And he gave an example of ASIM investment thesis, which included basically, recession resistant assets is what he was going after. And then to finish the phone call, he suggested to basically say, hey, I will email you the ES or the webinar, or, you know, maybe schedule a link for another phone call if you have additional questions. And he stressed to make sure not to go over the 30 minutes. It was super important to stick to the time frame to show the investor that you respect their time, you're respectful of others' time, you're respectful of your time. And then also ask if it's okay to reach out in 5 days. That is, if, you know, you send a follow-up email and investor doesn't respond, then you have permission already to connect with them again. So that sort of covers the post-introductory phone call. And he said, you know, basically send out an email to set up another call, maybe follow up with another email of no response, and that's it. And not to follow up again, because otherwise it sends a message of desperation. And he was talking a lot about when you sound desperate, when you're really needy, that's when people can sense it and they don't want to deal with you and they don't want to be in that space. So he said that there's going to be later opportunities to reopen the discussion with that same investor. Maybe he wasn't interested in at that time, but then if you have a new webinar or a new investment opportunity or a dinner they're setting up, in-person dinner with investors, then maybe that would be a chance to reach out again down the road to kind of say, hey, now I have this, is that of interest, kind of thing. And then the next he talked about the due diligence phone call, which would be the call number 2, where he suggests to discuss specifics of the offering and specifics of the business that you're, you know, trying to grow. And that call could be up to 1 hour with a goal of educating, answering questions, clarifying, and showing expertise to basically show the investor, you know what you're doing, you have experience with this. And finally, he talked about tips, which would be make sure to prepare with a friend or partner, basically try to write out of every question you can possibly think the investor would have and practice answering those with someone so that you're not thinking of answers on the fly, because then you don't look very knowledgeable and intentional. And then he suggested to outline key assumptions to confirm that the assumptions you're making in the deal are conservative, you know, showing how they're conservative to the investor, and then discuss them, and to basically also leave off a few conservative assumptions off of ES, so you can discuss them in the call. You can say, well, you know, not only was I conservative in the ES, I'm also making these other conservative assumptions. I didn't take into account this additional potential income, and the deal works even without these bonuses, kind of thing. He said also to confirm understanding of the time frame, be honest, remind of the deadline. You want to also create some urgency, basically say, okay, you know, this is the deadline for you to invest. Otherwise, you know, he talked about basically that, you know, they expect to be oversubscribed by whatever date. So if the investor is interested in putting in money into the investment, and they can do it sooner rather than later. So because people are busy and they don't necessarily remember deadlines. So he talked about importance of that. So that was pretty much the chapter. I thought it was a really, really good chapter because of all the specific details that he put in there in terms of, you know, here's an example of the email and here's the apps I'm using. He does this throughout the books, but I thought that was really good. So I don't know if you had any other feedback from that. And it was a long chapter. So that's all I got.
Good job, Alina.
Yeah, it was a great job.
That was a big chapter.
I'm glad you mentioned the, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank on his name now. The Pitch Anything, Oren Klaff. Have you read the book?
Yeah.
Has anybody read the book?
I've not. I just ordered it on Audible like last week.
It's awesome, man. It's for those that have raised capital so far. When I got into this game, there was a sense of not necessarily nervousness, but as a beginner, right? Like I had never raised capital before, invested in real estate.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's all about what Oren says. It's called pricing, which Alina alluded to. It's like, hey, listen, these deals, in my opinion, and there's a lot of data to back it up, are awesome. I mean, freaking awesome. Much safer than the stock market with potentially outsized returns in the stock market. So on a risk-adjusted basis, it's a really easy sell. But it's not even like selling. You're just like, hey, you're giving somebody an opportunity that they wouldn't otherwise have access to, and that makes the conversation 1,000 times easier. Anyways, just wanted to throw that point out there.
Yep.
Got anything else, Logan?
No, I mean, the Pitch Anything and Flip the Script are two books that Oren Klaff has written that are required reading for Silicon Valley startup companies, and I think should be required reading for anybody who is communicating about real estate projects. And with that being said, he has an online platform that I am currently going through, and he has a one time a year kind of event out in San Diego, and that's coming up in March that I'm thinking about going to as well. So if that doesn't put any weight behind, the value I think that he brings, it's extremely important to think through kind of his methodology. It's the strong methodology: set the frame, tell the story, reveal the intrigue, offer the prize, nail the hook point, and get the deal. And so there's a lot that goes into all of that. But the guy has been super successful, and I think that book, Pitch Anything, is wonderful, but Flip the Script might even be better for people who are having communications about real estate too. So check that book out as well, and I think they're incredible resources for people to look into. Great job, Alina.
Yes, I bought Flip the Script. It's on the bookshelf. I haven't hammered it out yet. So if Tony's not on, this is Aaron, by the way. If Tony's not on, I'll just jump into.
I'm here.
Oh, you want to jump back to chapter 9 or?
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. I was on my cell phone. You guys couldn't hear me, but I was so lucky to get the shortest chapter of 4 pages long. So this one is titled Hitting the Investors Where It Counts. And this is the Mastering the Art of the Investor Dinner. Right up my alley. Anyway, he goes on to say, after you've got your executive summary out, your webinars out, and you're just rock solid on your presentation, you should focus. Your next step should be an investor dinner. And he goes on to list eight little steps you should do. And you want to make the dinner focused on the attendees' experience and not so much yourself. The attention should more or less focus on logistics, where you're going to have it, what kind of food, the flow, the atmosphere, and then the level of service, and things down to the smaller details of sound quality, linens, and etc. So this chapter is so short, I'll just kind of go through and highlight one or two things from each of the 8 that he listed. So the first one being, bring as many team members as possible. Here he says, basically, invite the team that you're working with. And I'm assuming that's the syndicators, GPs, and everybody. Bring them to these dinners and place them at different tables so that your investor can meet them and network with them and make them feel more comfortable about the deal. Number 2, he says, encourage a few of your previous investors and savvy friends, family members to attend to kind of support you. This way it'll kind of set you at ease because you'll see familiar faces in the audience. It'll boost your confidence, and you place them strategically around the dinner and they'll be singing your praises. So that was cool. That's pretty neat. Number 3, He says basically shorten the content and leave plenty of time for the Q&A. So by this time, he's saying you got your slideshow and your presentation down pat. Let's try to leave a lot of time for question and answers because you're hoping for that. Let's see. And then obviously during the night, you want to directly interact with people investing with you and just kind of be that social butterfly, go to table, introduce yourself, and just put yourself out there. Try to shake as many hands as possible. Number 4, he says, before the event, and this I thought was really intriguing because I never thought of this before. Before the event, visualize things going wrong, which I thought was neat. So things, and he gave some examples of things going wrong, like not enough people show up, the microphone doesn't work, the PowerPoint presentation can't be pulled up, and it's too hot in the room. So I've kind of answered these questions myself. So if there was not enough people that showed up, I would be bummed, but I would move on. The show must go on. So I would move on. If my microphone didn't work, hey, I speak louder. I got a pretty loud voice. I'll just wing it and speak louder. PowerPoint presentation can't be pulled up. Well, I got 100 copies all ready to go. So pass those out. And it's too hot in the room. He says here, acknowledge it. If you know it's too warm or too cold in the room, it's best to acknowledge it. And that way it kind of sets the participants at ease or your investors at ease because you're not trying to hide it. So if you make light of it, make a joke of it, it's better to do that. So I thought that was cool. The microphone part kind of hit home with me. I was at a cousin's wedding 2 weeks ago. And it was a small, like 50-person intimate wedding out in the middle of a winery. It's pretty quiet, and the microphone didn't work. And the DJ was going crazy. He kept changing the batteries and giving him another mic, and it got to be really annoying. So the officiant was actually a family member, and I was like, buddy, put the mic down and just talk. And he just would not do it, and he just didn't have a plan B, and he was kind of getting embarrassed and flustered. And I finally went up and took the mic from him. I said, use your big boy voice. It was the weirdest thing. Some people are just not good at like going, flying off the cuff. So I can definitely relate to that microphone not working story. Number 5, don't serve dinner until the presentation is over. He says that sometimes the noise level will increase, and I've experienced that just in seminars I've gone to, and that's a pretty important point. Serve it once the presentation is over. That way, things go a lot smoother and saves more time for Q&A. The dinner should be nice, but not extravagant. You got to realize that these people are making more than $200,000 annually, so the experience should be refined, but not to imply that you spent the money unwisely. Number 7, allow the attendees to RSVP +1 or +2, as long as they're accredited investors, right? The more money, the better, especially if they're networking with other net worth and high net worth individuals. Might as well let them bring them along. And then finally, number 8, prior to hosting the dinner, draft an email to thank the guests for attending, and then link them to previous recordings of the webinar to provide a call to action. So he again recommended Mixmax for that one. And then in closing, he talked about body language and being being mindful that your body language communicates your internal thoughts. I don't know if any of you have presentation experience or been around good speakers, but it really is important. I've done one or two just kind of in my field of expertise, and it does help to kind of not be afraid to take up physical space, so to speak. You know, confident speakers, they stand tall, you move with intention, and you walk towards or physically engage with their audience. So we should all try to do that. Timid, people that really are not confident, that'll come across, and it just doesn't look good, especially if you're trying to raise money. And one of the characters he mentioned was the notorious one, Conor McGregor, how he struts into the ring every UFC fight. He just exudes confidence. So he's kind of saying, be that guy in the room. You know, be that guy. Exude confidence, not too much confidence, but enough to prove that you know what you're doing. So that was it. That was it in a nutshell. I'll go on to do my three key takeaways. First, visualize things going wrong. That really stood out to me. I'll use that next time. I come from a safety first mindset because I work out in the oil field, so I always am doing that. I just never related or thought of doing it during a presentation. And then serve dinner after the webinar presentation. That was cool because it does tend to get loud with the clanking of the glasses and forks and whatnot. And then finally, the confident speakers stand tall and take control of the room. That really stood out for me as a key takeaway. You got to be confident when we're raising money. We got to be the ones that are probably the smartest. Well, not so much the smartest, but we gotta know what we're talking about and just exude that confidence. And then one of the questions, anything I didn't understand, it was pretty straightforward. So I would say no to that. One notion I didn't agree with maybe was having a dinner. Like, when do you have dinners? Like, I don't think I'm going to have one on my first raise. Like, he even failed at it. So not to say I'm not going to do it because he failed at it, but my comfort level is not there to throw a big dinner party on my first raise. It might come for me in my second or third, but right now I'm focusing on the individuals in my life that I'm close to that are high net income earners. And then I might do it as a celebration, like after my first raise or my first deal. You know, if that syndication pays out and everybody's kicking butt, I might just do it as a celebratory dinner. So what action am I going to implement? I think right now I'm not going to implement any dinners. I'm going to continue just speaking with my network and friends and family to raise money that way. So far, so good. I've been talking to a lot of my friends and telling them what I'm doing, and they are super curious, and they love real estate. So I'm finding out that a lot of these people never knew that I was in real estate and invested. So it's kind of cool to kind of reconnect. And then I do not have any personal experience other than small little engagements I've done. But yeah, I would take from this book maybe be a little more confident and engage with the audience more. So that's about it, ladies and gentlemen. Shortest chapter in the book, 4 pages.
You made it sound long.
Yeah.
I do have a question for maybe somebody who's had some capital raising experience, like in terms of what you actually questioned the dinners. To me, it almost came out of order. Like, in my mind, don't you want to kind of vet the investor with the introductory phone call and have that conversation first before you inviting them to dinner? That was kind of my thought, but I don't know. Has anybody done these? Like, what have you done? What worked? What didn't work?
I found that odd too. It was kind of out of place.
I'm Ben, by the way. I'm new this week, but I've actually done several dinners and had a pretty terrible success at it. So I don't know if it was a challenge on our end or the mechanism didn't work. But we actually did use a third-party marketing company to send out direct mailers. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. Sent out direct mailers, and we got all accredited investors, but most of them had not invested in real estate before. And the response was positive until they went and talked to their financial advisors and decided that taking AUM out of the financial advisor's pocket is not in their best interest. And we spent probably $15,000 to $20,000 on meals and other things. And so, I think there's probably a place for it. But I think some level of vetting is probably, worthwhile.
Those dang advisors.
Exactly.
Maybe it's a dinner for financial advisors and trying to convince them that real estate is better.
Yeah, there you go.
No, so Brian Ellis, I went to his one-day capital raise system, and he was talking about doing essentially a webinar presentation that drives people to a dinner presentation or a lunch presentation, specifically at the asset. So if we're investing in Tucson and we have a 90 to 150 unit deal, first you get people to watch the webinar, get information on it, and then kind of disqualify themselves, if you will. So only people that are qualified to invest with you will ever show up at your dinner. And this will be an asset-specific dinner for a closing, and you kind of incentivize them to show up because they may get a higher percentage return if they show up at this event. And then you want to have, like what he was saying, Hunter Thompson was saying, is a lot of your team members at this event. If you're going to do it the way Brian Ellis says anyways, and I haven't done one, so don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say to do this or not to do this. I'm just saying this is what he talks about. He actually, once people are interested in the asset and they have qualified themselves and they want to work with you, you take them to this event, you hopefully can get them to the asset itself, especially if there's like a management office or somewhere they can actually go in, physically touch the property. But you want to, on the way there, if they're flying in or if they're local investors, you want to take them to a networking event or a dinner or a lunch on the way to the property, and then get them to know your team. And then at that event, you want to close them. But you don't want to do it in such a way where you come across like you need the money. And you're really kind of taking away closing them. You don't even actually sell them. You just say, hey, so here's all the information. If you want more information on this deal, we're probably going to oversubscribe. Just let us know, and then turn around and walk away. And then all of the people that are at this event will probably have already qualified themselves, probably already interested in investing, and probably don't want to be closed, but yet they want to be closed. So in that sense, they're looking for an investment. And when you look at it, multifamily is one of the best assets that you can invest in. And I think these people, if they qualify themselves to go to your event, are actually looking to invest with you. So that would be the situation I would think if there's ever going to be a dinner to do something like that. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you,
Anybody
Ruben.
else?
Yeah, that's great.
You want to move on, Logan?
Sorry about that.
2 more chapters.
I got disconnected there for about 5 minutes, so apologize. I've been kicked out twice on this Zoom call. I'm not sure what's going on. But I want to give my 2 cents about a investor dinner. I think it's a interesting concept, and I have tried to adjust it from an investor dinner because I don't live really in what I'll call a money state. I think there's money states and I think there's deal states. I live more in a deal state. So 95% of my brokerage clients and investors are typically people who do not live in Kansas City Metro. And so I have tossed around the idea about hiring Chrissy Thompson, who put on Hunter's event, their event out there in January, for doing an actual smaller scale real estate conference here in Kansas City instead of an actual investor, just dinner. So that is something that we are exploring right now, and figuring out if it makes sense for us to put on kind of a Midwest investing real estate summit here in Kansas City. And I don't know if Jerome ever joined here, but Jerome runs an event out in, I believe his is in Atlanta or Carolinas. I can't remember exactly where, but he'd be interesting to kind of talk through this as well. Did Jerome join? Does anybody know?
Yeah,
I'm here.
Jerome's on here.
Oh, okay, cool. What are you talking? Or unless you already talked, I might have missed you while I was on trying to figure out how to get back connected here.
I haven't. So the question, do I think you should do what you're doing with Kansas City? Yeah, because everybody wants to invest in Kansas City. Part of the reason why I'm doing Greensboro is because everybody wants to invest in Raleigh and Charlotte. And while I want to be the Greensboro guy, like you're the Kansas City guy. If somebody's going to invest in Kansas City, they're at least going to call you and see if it's okay if they come. And for me, I'm willing to buy anything in between Charlotte and Charlotte and Raleigh. Greensboro sits in the middle of both of those, and so we've got one highway that connects all of it. So my ambition with the conference is to get people to the market just so they can see that there's more to North Carolina than the two largest cities. I live in the third largest city. We have a population of over 200 in the city that I live in. But when you add on Winston-Salem and High Point, we end up in a space that competes with Raleigh really well. And if you add in Burlington, it gets even bigger. And so, when you add those four cities all together, they're all within 30 minutes of each other, 45 minutes. It makes a ton of sense. So really it's just the exposure piece and establishing myself as the guy. I haven't been able to do what you've done with Kansas City, but I do aspire to be the person that gets thought about when people are thinking about North Carolina.
Yeah. I guess the real, that's great. And I would agree with you 100%. I think that positioning yourself as the expert in anything is extremely important and valuable. I have not seen, mostly because, like I said, I don't really live in what I'm calling a money state. I have not seen an ROI on having investor-specific dinners unless I have a large enough project where I'm flying people in and they're going to actually tour it themselves, and we haven't done that yet. What we do obviously is our monthly meetings, the real estate investor meetups, and we have thought about putting on a conference. I haven't done the actual dinners themselves. So it's a unique concept for sure. And I know Ruben just talked about Brian Ellis, and that's his whole kind of methodology. And Alina with an A, I'm not sure if she joined or not, but she took Brian Ellis's training as well. And I know she has some thoughts on these, but I think it's definitely unique. It's just very time intensive and can be expensive as well. So those are my thoughts.
So
Logan,
if I can, is it your goal? So is it all about the transaction for you, or is it about running your own deal? Is it about raising the money? Like, I know we're going through Hunter's book and it's talking about raising money, but I think everybody's got a different conversation. I've talked to Yona in some detail about his thoughts about raising money, and it's just like some people just are going to raise money. They don't have any ambition in actually running their own deal. Logan, you want people to come to Kansas City and do their 1031s with you selling a piece. So I guess for me, it's helpful. Is the goal for everybody on the call to be a money raiser, or are you raising so that you can go do your own deals? Like what?
I can speak from my part. I'm a part of a group that has a track record that's really good at underwriting, that's really good at acquiring deals and finding deals, but they're not so good at the raising money side. So they brought me on to help with that aspect. And the first thing I did was to launch a show so that I could help. That's my contribution to the team. Do I want to be an underwriter? No. I actually want to master raising money more than any other aspect within this niche. And some people say it's a completely different niche, a completely different business altogether. The finding and the acquiring of deals is a business, and the finding and the acquiring of investors and money is a completely separate business. So that's the aspect that I want to learn. That's why I'm on this call. That's why I have my show about raising money for multifamily syndication. And that's what I want to master.
Yeah, I'll answer from my perspective. This is Logan. You know, I think that I raised some capital earlier this year and late last year for deals that were not in Kansas City and I had never seen before, and I never went and saw, felt, touched, and or were involved in other than bringing capital. And here's the thing, I got paid for my time to do that, and I'm getting a part of the project, but I felt extremely unfulfilled from doing that. And so I had to get really clear with myself to say, look, do you want to raise money for other people's projects, or do you want to invest in the city that you live in, that you're trying to end homelessness in, and where your family is going to live? And, you know, midway through January, I made a decision that I'm not going to really focus on many more markets than Kansas City. And so that lends me to be not only doing capital raising all the time. I think it's something that you should always be kind of focused on and doing, but also just having the brand and the network to be able to provide to buyers and sellers, hey, I got a national outreach. Also, you know, I have all these people in Kansas City that I can, you know, introduce you to, and nationally if you would like that. So for me, it has become less of just for capital raising for a business, and more of, hey, how do I position myself as the go-to expert in all things Kansas City? And I've found a lot more fulfillment for myself doing that. So I won't be really capital raising for any projects outside of Kansas City. It just was really unfulfilling for me. I hope that answers your question there, Jerome.
Yeah, that's solid. I mean, and you're not only taking the niche, you've taken the city in the niche, which you're placing a big bet. But it's super narrow.
Exactly. Totally. All right. How many more chapters we got, guys?
I'll be fairly quick. I got chapter 11, which is frequently asked questions, but I got to ask Jerome if he just busted out some cinnamon rolls real quick.
Working on dinner, man. No, they're croissants. No cinnamon rolls, just croissants. I should have turned the video off.
Yes, I got the chapter on frequently asked questions and how to answer them. I told you I'll be quick, and the reason being it's sort of a funny chapter to have a discussion about, because it's literally just a list of questions with answers, and how Hunter would answer them. Fast forward a little bit, my short answer, which Hunter didn't mention directly, is just to answer them proactively before even getting on calls with potential investors. The way I try to do that in my business is typically blog posts or frequently asked questions section on my website. I invest passively as well as an LP, so one of the syndicators I'm talking to sent me like this extensive PDF of frequently asked questions. I know the business pretty well, but it was still pretty overwhelming. It kind of turned me off as a potential LP, but anyways, it's just another thing to think about for your business. I think there was like 10 or 11 topics, so to speak. I just picked 4 of them. We can run through them real quick. The first one's, why I should invest passively versus buying my own property or being active, so to speak. What happens if I need the money during the hold period? What are the risks? And then how are your incentives aligned with investors? This first one speaks near and dear to my heart, right? So why should I invest passively versus buying my own property? I think the root of this question comes from a potential investor's ability or even willingness to give up control, right? So I tell people, hey, you're going to give up control for expertise. The way Hunter breaks it down is 4 sections, right? Partner with experienced operator, so there's your expertise. Diversify across geographies and potential asset classes. I noticed a lot of Hunter's, I just met Hunter a couple weeks ago at his conference. A lot of his book even targeted like Southern California, right? So a lot of his folks or people in his sphere make a lot of money, but there's no deals in Southern California, at least to my knowledge, like cash flow. So his idea is, hey, you can invest in different markets outside of your home state. So that's a way to diversify. Risk, as an LP, as you guys all know, the only risk you have is losing your own money. There's other risks, but the main risk, if you invest $50,000, the most you can lose is $50,000. They're not going to come after your house. They're not going to come after other personal assets, that kind of stuff. And then incentive alignment, I get this question a lot. People are like, well, it looks like you guys on the GP side are going to make a lot of money. And the answer is, yeah, I mean, there's potential to do that, right? And when I'm investing as an LP, just totally passive, I want to see the sponsorship team have the opportunity to make a boatload of money once they hit certain investment hurdles. Why? Because I think they'll work harder, try harder, etc. And I want that as an LP. So those were hunters. One point I would add is, hey, it really boils down to a lifestyle question. What kind of lifestyle are you wanting? Do you want the landlord active lifestyle, which I was just a part of for the last 6 years? I am so freaking excited. I just sold my final duplex last Friday. I am totally out of that game. So you want a landlord lifestyle, or do you want a freedom lifestyle? And I picked a freedom lifestyle. And I think a lot of my investors and people in my circle can see that, because we're all married with young kids. That seems to be like my avatar. And people, I have folks that used to invest in real estate. I have folks that never even knew you could invest in these kind of deals. And people want that. I mean, I was getting calls. I only had 11 units. I didn't have like this 100-unit portfolio. 11 units in my personal name. I tell people, man, I thought I was a really good landlord. I thought I treated people fairly. I thought I was nice. I never, ever, ever got one call. They just say, hey, Aaron, just want to say you're a rock star landlord. Thanks for everything you do. It was always the toilets overflow, the bugs, whatever. And those calls, when you get them when you're with your family on the weekend, you just cringe, and it's like, it brought me anxiety. So anyways, you can tell I'm super excited to get out of that stuff. And,
Absolutely.
go passive, man. It's awesome. So that's that. Quick, I'm trying to save time here. What happens if I need money during the whole period? I'm very frank, and so is Hunter. That's the downside of real estate syndications. They are illiquid, right? Once your money's in, you should plan to not touch it again outside of monthly, quarterly distributions until the asset sells. It's important, in my opinion, to make sure your investors or potential investors are very aware of that. If they have college, cars, whatever, wedding, maybe it's coming up. Say, hey, this isn't the right deal this isn't the right time for you. It might be the right deal, but it's not necessarily the right time. And just be honest and upfront with them. And it's important, as part of the GP team, to, if you have a big deal, you might have a couple hundred investors. You want to have a worst case scenario, right? There's going to be a guy that has an emergency that he didn't see coming. How can we help him out? How can we get him out? And the answer typically on most deals that I'm in is, hey, the GP has the option to buy him out. If that doesn't work, or they don't want to, it goes to the other investors, the other LPs. If that doesn't work, that person typically needs to go find another accredited investor to take his spot. So what are the risks? There's a handful of them, but according to Hunter, and I tend to agree, the biggest risk in these deals is who you're making a bet on. As I alluded to earlier, you're placing money, you're giving up control, hopefully partnering with expertise. So who's the operator, number one, and who's the property manager actually on the property doing the tenant screening, all that stuff. Who are you making a bet on, and what is their track record? Hunter goes into detail, thorough detail about the due diligence process, how you vet a sponsor and all that. But the idea that Hunter does, and I'm trying to relate this in my business, is saying, hey, even if you, Mr. Passive Investor, had all the time in the world to do due diligence, you couldn't do as good a job as I can. You don't know these markets, you don't know these deals as well as I can. That's not like a brag. It's just like, you want to portray, we've done hundreds and hundreds of checklist items in due diligence. I'm betting this, so to speak, and hopefully that works out for you. And then finally, how are your incentives aligned with investors? As Hunter said, it's really important to highlight how you have aligned your incentives for long-term performance, and not just to get a deal done and funded. This is a relationship business. This is not a transaction business, although people can make a lot of money pretty quickly on some of these acquisition fees, but I digress. He talks about elaborating on that. Most of your proceeds as a sponsor come on the back end, right? So you gotta hit certain return thresholds to really make the good money, the a lot of money. Typically, someone on the GP team is signing up their personal balance sheet, right? A lot of these loans are non-recourse, but there's bad boy clauses, et cetera, that if something happens, not only do you lose the deal, but they can come out to your personal assets if you sign on that GP side. And then finally, this one resonates with me because I've invested personally in every deal that I've put together, I've been a part of. I believe in these deals. My money's going here. My friends are in these deals. My family's in these deals. My grandpa's in these deals. I make that very clear to, like, hey, people I truly, truly, truly care about. And of course, I care about you, Mr. Passive Investor. but my family that I've known forever are in these deals, and I've vetted them, and I want them to invest alongside me. I think that goes a long, long way with courting investors. So I told you I'd be quick. I will pause there, open up the questions if you agree or disagree with anything I said, or anything Hunter said, I should say. And then if you have any other frequent asked questions you guys come across as you're raising money or putting together deals.
I can't stress enough how important it is to understand and think through the frequently asked questions before you have calls, especially if you're newer at this capital raising. These questions are going to get asked. Joe Fairless has a document I have shared with a few folks, I think, on the group here, that he put together about frequently asked questions. And for every offering that we have, I go through and I fill that out specific to that deal. And I send that along with all of our, pre-PPM and offering agreement stuff. So I think it's important not only to think through that, but also understand the questions and the answers, because this whole capital raising piece of the equation is a lot about perception. And, both sides are taking a leap of faith with each other. And so you have to be able to instill that trust really, really quickly. And the way that you do that typically is through your vast experience that, that I definitely don't have, or your vast knowledge in studying of the particular deal, and everybody can do that. So that's my 2 cents on this. Great job, Aaron. And way to go on getting rid of your management intensive, landlord properties, man. That's awesome.
Hey, Logan, do you care? Thanks for the comments there, by the way. But do you care to share that? I'm sure I probably already have it. If it's Joe's, I think he has one in his book. Do you care to just share that with the group after the call?
Yeah, I will absolutely send it.
Cool. I'll defer to Mr. Eric there. I think Eric's is next.
That would be me. All right, Aaron. Thanks, bud.
No problem.
I think Logan was taking it easy on these newbies because I also got like a super short chapter. I think it's 7 pages. So thanks for that, Logan.
You're welcome, Eric.
Yeah, buddy. But the chapter is closing the sale, taking commitments, and getting the deal funded. So Hunter makes the point initially to be intentional about systematizing your closing process so that you can streamline and optimize it. Furthermore, he says establish follow-up dates and the final decision deadline. This is definitely critical to keep the ball rolling. So as we know, the potential investors are usually going to be successful and busy, really busy, higher net worth individuals. So a question that I wanted to ask the group and that I'm curious about is what type of follow-up process do you guys implement into your business after having that initial call with a potential investor? So whoever wants to chime in, I'd be happy to hear about that.
For me personally, it's always a really fine line when you're following up with people that are that busy. Normally high net worth people are extremely, extremely busy. But I think it's important that you have to set that regularly. I try to make contact at least once every 2 to 3 weeks if there's not a lot of interest. If there's a lot of high interest, I'm contacting them weekly. It just kind of, you're trying to gauge that person. But what I've kind of found that's been successful, and I haven't done any large, very, very large deals, but I've done some small development deals where I've attracted money and stuff like that. Those deals, the biggest key that I've had is just to have a lot of different investors that you're talking to. Because the tendency is if you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 people that you're dealing with, the tendency is when, there's quote unquote downtime, you're like, oh my God, I gotta be contacting them. And you can kind of wear somebody out. But if you've got a database of 150 people, and don't get me wrong, I know it takes a while to get there. But if you've got 150 people, you're going to find that it's really hard to follow up with 150 people on a regular basis. So, I think early on for newbies, and again, I'm still a newbie, I'm still growing the database too, but I think it's very crucial to just continue to get people in the database. Yes, you still have to follow up with the people that you've already been talking to, but trying to fill up that pipeline as big as you can to get to the point where it's difficult to follow up with a lot of people. Because then you're not going to be worried about how often you're following up as much as you are about what you're putting out there for follow up. You know, whether it's the deals that you're doing or recap of what you're, you know, doing that week or that month or whatever. So.
Yeah, good stuff. Awesome. All right. Anybody else want to chime in?
I really like, so I interviewed Jerome on my show a while back, and he got my contact information, and now I get emails from him talking about how he helped kill a man and things of that nature. Really good stuff. I really love his content. We're actually in a phase where we're trying to implement communication and an investor infrastructure so that we can continually get in front of people, because as we evolved from wholesaling into multifamily syndication, a lot of our investor communications was very, you know, we found the deal, we closed the deal, here's your return plus your original capital, and that was it. But as we've moved into multifamily syndication and larger deals, that doesn't cut it. So one of the things that we're trying to do is either bring on an investor relations person that's good at writing articles and emails and MailChimps and sending out communication, or create our own infrastructure to do that. Or one of the things that we're looking at doing is co-GPing with somebody that is very good at doing that. So if they come in on our deal, they basically have access to their investor database that they're pitching our deals to, and they manage the communication. And we found somebody that if we end up doing business together, will handle that aspect of it. So I think a couple of those things, getting some kind of a newsletter or an email campaign or something where you're constantly getting in front of them, and then inviting them to talk to you anytime, and always being open, being accessible to them. Because at least I've heard, I've never been an LP on a deal, but at least I've heard that some people are just very challenging to get on the phone. So we're trying to stay available to them. And then anybody that we bring on as an investor relations guy or a potential co-GP would be extremely beneficial if they either refer to us or manage the investor communications, because that's not our strong point yet.
Ruben, I have a question about that. So when you are co-GPing with these folks, how do you normally set that up? Do you just do some kind of, equity split of the GP, or do you just carve out a particular portion of the GP for, whoever's raising the equity? Like I got to talking to a guy here not too long ago about a co-equity raise on on just a small build to rent deal here in Nashville, and they were basically carving out 30% of the GP for the equity raise. So, and it was bracketed basically, I think the raise was like $4 million. And so that $4 million equated to 30% of the GP. So if you raised $1 million, you got 25% of the 30%, if that makes sense.
Yeah, man. Well, so the first thing that I'm going to say is that every single deal is going to be open to interpretation and negotiation. So there is no one specific way that you're going to do it or that we're going to do it. And what I've also seen from some potential co-GPs is they have either experience doing co-GPs, and they say, hey, this is how I structured the last deal. So we're always coming from a place of trying to find out what they've done in the past. And then the other thing is there's typically probably going to be a sliding scale. So if all you're doing is bringing the equity, you're going to get so much. If you're also underwriting, if you're also property managing, if you're also boots on the ground, if you're also this, that, and the other, for every little thing that you do, you're going to be getting a bigger and bigger portion. And depending on how that fits within your company and what you need and what they can offer and how that structure works, that number is going to change on every single deal, on every single co-GP that you bring on if you're doing multiple co-GPs.
Right. Makes sense.
I want to make sure I understood what you just said, because there's legalities around it. So the 30% is independent of where they actually raise the money, right?
Okay, so That's another big aspect that you got to say, that you got to clarify, and I didn't do that. So typically when we're co-GPing, that means that they're actually becoming a partner on the deal, because if you pay somebody, that opens up a different can of worms, you know? So if you're paying somebody that's got a securities license, or somebody approaches you and says, hey, I want to raise some money for you guys, which I've had people do that. And in some cases they're doing it incorrectly, and we have had to turn those people away. But yeah, that's, you got to be very careful, because there's, and then discuss it with your lawyer, because there's a lot of ways you can get in a lot of trouble if you're not, one, either an employee of the business that you're raising company for, or two, an actual partner of the business that you're raising money for.
Right.
Can't get
They
paid.
can't get a percentage. Just know that you can't say, okay, if you raise 100,000 or $1 million, you get X percent.
Actually, you can do that. You can do that. But then once you negotiate that, you can't change it. If they raise more than what they originally anticipated they were going to raise, or less than what they were originally going to anticipated that they would be able to raise, you cannot change their percentage, because that is paid. That is the payment structure in equity, which is the same thing as getting paid financially for the services you do. One of the things that we've heard from Russ Franson, our lawyer, he's a syndication lawyer out of Los Angeles that works with Joel Block, a business coach in syndication, is to structure it this way. And I'm not saying to do this, I'm saying go get advice if you're interested. And one of the things that he mentioned was to, instead of getting paid based off of the amount of money that you raise, get paid based off of the amount of people that you raise money from, or the number of total subscribers into your deal. So whether you bring in one person or 10 people, you can get paid, I don't know, let's just say $1,000 for easy math for each subscriber. And whether they bring in $1 million or $50,000, you get paid the same amount. And you would want to clarify that that's cool with your syndication lawyer before you do something like that. But that's a creative structure too that I haven't heard in a lot of places.
All right, awesome. That's great, Ruben.
Yeah,
Very cool. Thank you.
great points. Appreciate that. I'll wrap it up here since we're already 7 minutes past the hour. He goes on to talk about once commitments have been established, legal documentation and execution takes place. The biggest takeaway or point that is fairly obvious, but I still think it's worth reiterating: repeat investors are the key to scaling your business. So he talks about how to send thank you notes after receiving funds, sending out quarterly reports on the investments, and responding to emails within 24 hours, and then also sending gifts to high-level investors. So I'd like to hear about, as far as those gifts, he talked about a couple of examples like tumblers or wireless chargers. Is there anything else that people have sent out to their highly accredited investors that they'd like to share?
Yeah, I will. I send every investor and brokerage client $100 worth of Kansas City barbecue after we do a deal. So we have Jack Stack Barbecue here in Kansas City. It's world renowned, and so a week after we close, you get a bunch of barbecue sauce and ribs and all this kinds of stuff at your front door. So that's been super local and very, very well received. And I do have some vegetarian clients, and they do sell jackfruit, and so I send barbecued jackfruit instead. So that's what I have picked on my end. Anybody else?
Mine's is a whole lot cheaper, but I send. You ever seen like those 26.2 like runner badges that people put on the back of their cars for marathons? I put our logo for the property in one of those, and so people can put it on the back of their car and just tell them, hey, it's a marathon, guys. We're not going to sprint, but we're in this for the long run, and I think it's pretty cool. I'm trying to put as many on my car as I can.
That is cool. Yeah.
Right on. Well, that's all I got. Appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that, guys. I really appreciate that. You know, Ruben, one thing I wanted to touch on is I recently was out at eBay, Amazon, and Apple speaking, and I actually got to go to Apple's headquarters in Cupertino, and I found my niche of high net worth investors. A lot of people find their own niche. Mine has been tech employees that work in California, as well as I'm starting to infiltrate some really what I'll call influential doctors groups. And so the tech employees, though, I was in the startup world. I can speak that language a little bit, and I've been able to infiltrate that network out in California. And what I'm doing is bringing one point person from those companies on my projects and allowing them to run point on, you know, finding the capital or a certain amount of capital from their own network. It does two things. One, it positions them as the expert, and secondly, it allows me to compensate this person in the right way because they are signing on the loan typically if it is recourse, and we are using their balance sheet if we're going after non-recourse debt, but also they can get compensated for being a true general partner on the project. But I don't have to manage 20, 25, 30 investors that are, you know, a part of a different group. And I've seen that to be, you know, extremely successful, and I'm still proving out that model. But what I would think about for each of you guys, and this might be some good homework, is what is your investor avatar? I heard Aaron talk about that, and Aaron must have read Richard C. Wilson's Raising Private Capital book, because that avatar language is out of that, unless he's just really smart. So it's either out of that book or so I would be thinking about what that avatar looks like for you guys and figure out how you can get involved in and be around those groups of people, because I'm seeing it be extremely beneficial in my business. So I just wanted to share that kind of nugget with you guys, that it's easy to, it's not easy, but it's beneficial to infiltrate those networks, find one point person, bring them on as you know, as somebody on your team if your values align, and allow them to grow and cast the net, you know, very, very wide. Because here's the reason why I do it. They can raise capital 10 times more effective than you can, because they are speaking the language of the techies. They're in that culture 100%, and they have to see those people on a daily basis, and those people trust them. It'll take you a year to get that relationship with those people. But if you can build that one relationship that can cast that net really, really far, you just exponentially increase your capital raising abilities by making one connection. So just something to think about, and kind of a model that I'm proving out right now that I wanted to share with you guys.
I have a question on this. How do you, what are you looking for in that one point person that you choose? Because that seems to be like the key to what you're doing. Because if you pick a person who is not necessarily going to be the champion of the project, or, you know, might not be as sociable or whatever, it's not every techie is sociable, you know, like
Yep.
what do you look for in that point person to be successful?
So each one of these companies typically, it's a great question. I mean, each company usually has a real estate investing club, and there is no solicitation in these clubs. However, it's education based. Well, typically the content they have is extremely rudimentary and elementary, of what I'll call. So sometimes they bring in outside speakers such as myself or Jeremy Roll, or I think Apple had the CPA guy from Rich Dad Poor Dad Advisors, not Kenny. I can't remember the guy's name you guys would know who I'm talking about. Yeah, Tom Wheelwright. They had Tom Wheelwright. Like, I was speaking to the same group that Tom Wheelwright went and spoke to. Like, that's a little ridiculous. But at the end of the day, I found a way to find these people who are already in the real estate investing club and or are running point on aggregating that meeting and putting that meeting together, Alina. So that's been my point person at these companies.
Thank you.
And so they're already sociable. They're already connected because they've already shown initiative by putting this meetup together inside their company. I'm just elevating their status and I'm making them the prize, right? I heard a little bit about pricing earlier. I'm making them the prize by giving them deal flow, and it seems to be working really well.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it's good, Logan.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Of course. All right, guys. Well, we're 15 minutes past. Thank you guys for staying on. I sent the whole group the investor FAQ document. I think you would find a lot of value just going through that and thinking through it, not only for yourself and your own projects that you put together, but if you're evaluating another GP and they can't answer these questions, you should think twice about being in their syndications. So I appreciate you guys.
See you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good stuff, guys.
Bye.